or someplace. But as the semester goes, the population of the class decreases, especially because it turns out that I don't require attendance. You know, it's not like the Army.
Yeah.
You know, where you end up in the jail if you don't show up.
Totally different if we're like the Army.
Etc. But the college education has really changed. It's no longer top down; it's bottom up. You know, so it's a consumer product. Yeah. I'm here to give you what you've paid for, basically, as opposed to the other approach, which is.
You keep saying that, but I just gotta insert. Actually, you're paying me here to pay me to
Well,
be here and get this.
That happens with the lucky of us. Those of us that have finagled the system one way or another.
That's what I did. I know why.
So, John Locke, famous for the social contract theory, because he's, there's Hobbes who gives us the first version of it, but basically the idea is that we, the people, create a social contract with one another, and that the legitimating narrative that explains justice in our society is the idea that we have agreed to this contract, and these are the principles of our contract. When this idea was first created by Hobbes and then Locke, and then the other famous one is Rousseau, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, you end up with, of course, the noble class, based on the idea that it's a top-down instead of bottom-up organization. This divine right. The king is the king because God said, "And you shall be king." And even at the time, it was Pope first, and then king, right? So, hence the absolutely amazing feat of Napoleon taking the crown from the Pope's hands and putting it on his own head, because I'm the one that's made me emperor, not you. It's kind of, crazy. But King George clearly didn't think anybody was right in the head if they thought that they had equal rights to him. What? Shoot him. Basically, I'll show them how much rights they have. Shoot them with this blunderbuss I have, etc. But of course, as we all know, well, maybe some of us don't, especially those that don't remember when Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue. I still remember the one student that said 1952, and I was thinking, I was born the year before that.
Come on, man.
You guys, no history, But so John Locke's famous for that, because his version of that social contract says there ought to be checks and balances, and that's political, because his affiliation was with William and Mary, which was the stadtholder in the Netherlands, who was a cousin of Charles II, and his wife, actually, Mary, who was really closer relative. So the two of them were invited over to replace James II, I think, because he was terrible, and also Catholic, which, in a Protestant society, and he was trying to bring them back to the fold and wipe out the Protestant faculty, so to speak. So James was not appreciated because he was too Catholic, and so you ended up with a glorious revolution where William and Mary are invited to be king and queen, and they were limited in their power. There were limited monarchs, as the kingdom, King Charles III still is, right? And so the belief was that the social contract didn't require an absolute monarch, as Hobbes argued for, but instead a checks and balances between the executor. I love the they're the executive. Notice the word execute is part of that, right? They were the ones that had the sword and the authority, to cut heads off, and the Parliament, who actually made the laws. They were the legislatives. They make the laws, and the executive's job is to do what Parliament says is their job as the executive. We, of course, have the same thing, except they went for a tripartite division of our government. So we have the legislative body, and we have the executive, although it's not for life, although some people would like it to be. And then we, unlike England, where if you've ever seen them when they have their annual parade of the executive body into Parliament, they're only invited once a year, in the Parliament. Otherwise, they have to stay out. They're not allowed in. But when they're invited in, they come in parading with the judiciary, and they have the gowns and the wigs, so it looks very British, as they come in. Because the judiciary is part of the executive in England, so they only have a bipartite government. Ours is tripartite, so theoretically we have the legislative body, which is independent of the executive independent of the call it the Parliament. Parliament is just French for the people that speak a lot. Parle, je parle, tu parles. We're the Parliament, right? And so we have the legislative, which is even more divided, because they wanted. Remember, they had to solve. Boy, I go off on so many tangents. But the goal was we want representatives of the people, so that's the House. But we also want to make sure that each state gets an even vote, and so they have the Senate. So you get every state has two. Even Alaska, we have 2 senators, but our population is like, where are they? There's more of us here today, but so we only get 1, Mary Peltola, for the moment. Uncle Ted, having passed away, still call him Uncle Ted, and you could even pose with him, because there's a statue of him on a bench in the airport. So people routinely post pictures of, on Facebook, of them sitting there, because Uncle Ted is like, you can. It's not my fault. So that's, Locke is important, because he inspired Jefferson, who is quite responsible for our experiment. But another aspect of Locke was what's called British empiricism. And the idea is, and why is it British? Well, because of Locke, actually. Empiricism is an old belief that we get our knowledge from an empirical, sense. One of the neatest things that's, I think, funny in the names is Sextus Empiricus is a famous is actually more of a skeptic, I guess. Sextus Empiricus is a philosopher. And yet in Latin, what does it mean? Sixth sense. No, maybe he saw dead people. That's a joke because of the movie The Sixth Sense. The little boy that sees dead people. It's Shyamalan all of his movies are just,
Weird. Yeah.
they just knock Stephen King out of the park, in my own opinion.
I agree.
However, and his kids are usually in the movies. It's kind of interesting. But so, what makes British empiricism different is because of John Locke, who, following Hobbes and a bunch of predecessors, believe that when we're born as children, most of us, we start out with a tabula rasa. You've heard the expression?
No, but I kind of
A blank slate. Here's one right here, right? And it's actually a blank table. Why create new words? What people did was they took a table and said, hey, this would be nice to write on. And they put it on the wall. So we got a table on the wall so that you could do stuff like this.
Mm-hmm.
But at the moment, it's blank. So the expression tabula, table, rasa, erased, right, is a blank slate. And the expression means we're born with a blank slate. We don't know nothing when we get started. It's wrong, by the way.
Right.
We absolutely know much better than that. But remember, this is 16 something. Let's do a more entertaining. So you can see dates and stuff. Notice 1632. Died in 1704. So remember 1776, that was the date, that David Hume died, and it's famous. Everyone remembers 1776 because of it being a great year for Pinot Noir. And that's what started our discussion about Indigenous Peoples Day, etc., because 1776 is actually really famous because of the July 4th declaration of that period. However, so you can see he's earlier than this. So it gives him plenty of time to influence folks who study at William and Mary College, right, in Virginia, which is where Jefferson went to college, and George Washington as well, and others of that same. And by the way, the teachers at William and Mary were Whigs. So if you're familiar with British history, the Tories and the Whigs are opponents still today. And the Whigs were Democrats, basically, the Democratic Party, anti the king, and the Tories were loyalists. So you get the conflict between really mostly Scottish Whigs and the Tories. And at the time in England, the Whigs lost, and so they fled. A lot of them fled. Where did they flee? They came to the colonies, and actually the British sent people to the colonies because that was a punishment. Instead of building prisons, they sent people to the colonies.
And Australia, right?
Australia, once we declared our independence, and they couldn't send their prisoners to here as punishment, they started sending them to Australia.
Which is why we get along.
I like that. That's a good thing. In any case, so you have really a bunch of upstart Whigs teaching young men in the colonies, and guess what? They all believe in the Whig philosophy, and so when they get their chance, they have a revolution to get rid of the king. And this time it worked, right? So you end up with an independent group of people. By the way, a lot of people will point out it's not really a revolution because they kept all the same policies, including like slavery and stuff. So it was really just a fight between what they called equals, really. We want our own leadership. So
That's a reaching argument. but-
yeah, so it wasn't like, okay, we got rid of the upper class
Right.
and now we're all communists or something of that sort. No, it was actually pretty much the same social structure,
Right.
except that they changed
Hands.
the way the leadership worked. But as an empiricist, the idea, that we have this tabula rasa on which experience